Brilliant. I can see some of you early birds joining. Thank you for joining us. We're just going to let these kind of the numbers trickle in. We are bang on the top of the hour, so we'll just let a few people flow in, and then we will get started. But just to thank you for joining us, and our esteemed panel of pre-sales guests. So what we'll do, we are going to be tight for time because there's a lot to cover off. So we're going to get started. Now it's on the top of the hour and we will go from there. So thank you all for joining us to unpick and dissect this latest SE workload and compensation report. And it is the largest of its kind in the industry. It's a great asset for us as pre-sales, but also sales and revenue leaders. Anyone in go-to-market, there's a lot you can draw from this report, and it gets bigger every single year. So there's well over 1,000 respondents covering the majority of the globe and definitely all regions on the globe. And that's a fantastic thank you from us to everybody who's participated, not only in the kind of collection of data, but also the understanding of the data and where we go, because it really helps us drive our profession forward, I believe. And speaking of profession, we have some of the brightest and best minds in the industry, and some of them were available to join us today. So I just want to welcome all of our panelists, and I just thank you in advance for sharing all of your views. How we're going to signpost this, I'm going to take a couple of minutes just to introduce all of our panelists and a little bit about the background for anyone not familiar with them. Then we're going to go through, and each panelist is going to have kind of 5 to 6 minutes to kind of recount their main takeaways from the report itself. How we're going to use the latter part of this webinar is then to say, well, how do we take that data and do something about it? So we're going to really dive into some of the deep topics. What I'd like you to do is be very active in the chat, okay? You've got us here. If you choose to put us on a second monitor and leave us kind of on mute, that's cool. You can watch the recording, but I'd love people, when you're doing these webinars, to be present. So maybe in the chat, while I'm introducing everyone, put in where you're watching from, okay? Where are you diving in from, and where are you joining us from in the world? I think it really reinforces the fact that we're such a global community. So feel free, drop something in the chat there while I introduce someone. So we're going to start with my good friend, Tony Francetic. So Tony, thanks for joining us. But Tony is Pre-Sales Support Director over at Thomson Reuters. Tony's the Director of Pre-Sales Support in the Tax and Professional Thomson Reuters division. And in this role, Tony oversees a team of solution consultants and sales development representatives supporting the tax workflows. Before moving into his role in pre-sales, he's managed a team of trainers in other divisions. Tony started his career at Thomson Reuters providing technical support to products and then transitioned full-time as a technical trainer. He continues to train internally on presentation skills and crucial conversations. Tony holds a cyber defense degree from Baker College and an integrated leadership studies degree from Central Michigan University. So Tony, thank you so much for joining us. Julia. So we have Julia Claridge. So Julia is a senior pre-sales solutions engineer at Atlassian. Atlassian, working with their largest global customers across EMEA. Spanning 18 years in the software industry, Julia started as a software developer, turned project manager, product owner, and Scrum Master. Julia speaks regularly at Atlassian events and in the broader pre-sales community about cloud topics, team collaboration, and more generic pre-sales topics as well. So Julia, thank you so much for joining us as well. We have Art Fromm. So Art is the owner-founder of Team Sales Development, Inc. Art's a sales transformation consultant with a wealth of consultative sales training and development expertise, based on 20 plus years as a customer and in pre-sales, sales, and sales management roles. Art began in engineering, quickly moved into the software space, running internal applications at Fortune 500 companies. And that led Art to areas like sales engineering, account management, and sales management positions. Art moved into internal sales enablement role in the 2000s and drove US business for a global learning provider, and eventually founded his own company in 2009, Team Sales Development. And that business is focused on helping SEs, IAMs improve results, seamless sales. Art, thank you so much for joining us.
Good to be here.
Moving on to Amanda. So Amanda joins us from very sunny Barcelona right now, but Amanda is a senior sales engineer over at Commvault. Amanda has helped build, scale, and grow the pre-sales organization over at Commvault there. And Amanda has more than 15 years of pre-sales experience, has worked in several countries. She's held leadership roles and has been recognized for her achievements, elevating the service levels in the team that she has led and been part of. Amanda's also a DEI advocate and is passionate about mentoring and helping pre-sales professionals of any background grow in their roles. Kerry. So Kerry joins us today, and Kerry is president and founder of Pre-Sales Mastery, and obviously very present on LinkedIn as well for anyone that follows Kerry. Kerry's helping B2B software sellers with more deals, get more personalized on one-on-one demo call coaching. Pre-sales mastery coach has recorded prospect demos to provide feedback on real-world performance and leverages the proprietary 103 metric demo performance best practice framework. Kerry has over 19 years of global pre-sales and sales enablement leadership experience at both startups and Fortune 50 companies. Kerry's also the founder of CETO, a Toronto chapter of SE Nation, and co-author with Chris White of the Pre-Sales Buyer's Guide. And last but not least is my good friend Peter Cohen. So Peter is the founder and principal of the second derivative, Great Demo. Peter's a published author, of which there is no doubt about that, and his two main books are The Great Demo and Doing Discovery Methodologies. Those books are focused on helping software organizations improve their pre-sales, sales, and marketing results, primarily through improving organizations' discovery and demonstration skills. Thousands of practitioners have been trained and apply Peter's methodologies around the world, enjoying the rewards of crisper sales cycles, reduced waste, and delighted customers. Peter has experience as an individual contributor, manager, and senior manager in marketing, sales, business development, and as a member of the C-suite. He also has been and continues to be both a prospect and a customer. So first and foremost, thank you all so much for joining us. Loads and loads of experience there. What I'm going to do is hand over to you. So Peter, would you like to kick us off? You were the last to be introduced, but the first to give your opinion. So what do you take from the pre-sales compensation and workload report this year?
Well, first of all, a lot of data. This report is rich with possibilities to explore. I did pick out a few items I wanted to highlight and submit as potential discussion topics for the rest of the group here, as well as folks who might offer comments through chat. So number one, overall, it seems like there's been little change, except perhaps in the wrong direction in terms of improvement from last year, and if one looks even further out longitudinally, previous years. So the question I need to pose to people is, are we learning? Are we taking action, or are we simply whining? So hopefully people are actually going to take action as a result of the data presented here. Number two, one of my most favorite subjects, doing discovery. This is a little bit like the weather. Everybody says we need to talk about it, we need to do more of it, but very few people are actually taking action there again. Highly important topic, and a very strong recommendation is stop talking about it and start actually practicing it. There are many possibilities on how to improve. There are a number of organizations that provide training in doing discovery. There's certainly my book, which I think has opened up a few dimensions that were never explored previously. But very frankly, stop talking about it and start executing it. The biggest topic of all that, again, is one of my personal themes, no decision rates. Gartner says, and others agree or corroborate, that for the typical SaaS software company, no decision rates are on the order of 45%, which means that nearly half of the sales opportunities that we are all engaged into go where? Everybody say it at once, nowhere. So would you like some of that time back in your lives? I was intrigued and saddened to see that 33%, I love this, 42% of all statistics are made up. 33% of all the respondents said they don't even track it, so they don't know what they don't know. They don't know what's going on. There are simple rubrics one can use in qualification and, more importantly, in discovery to actually avoid no decision outcomes, like, is there a critical business issue? Is there tangible value that actually maps to a payoff that is sufficient? Is there a critical date? These are easy questions to ask if people learn to ask them. That's a very important topic to me. The next, unqualified demos. The report shows that something like 25 to 30% of all demos were quote unquote unqualified. Again, there's a solution for this, vision generation demos. Talk about it in Great Demo. It's chapter 11 in the 3rd edition of Great Demo. Yulia, you'll have to I'll get you the new copy so you can see it. Take action, stop doing unqualified demos. However, it's not as simple as no disco, no demo. There is a quid pro quo associated with the prospect reaching out. You need to provide the prospect with just enough for them to say, oh, I can see what this could do, and then invite them into a discovery conversation if it makes sense. Finally, actually, I have two more. I noted that only half of the demos are listed as customized. All right, ladies and gentlemen, what is the definition of insanity? Everybody say it together. Okay, I'm not even going to say it because you already know the answer. If you are doing the same demo 3 times over or more, exactly the same demo as a human, everybody should be saying at this point, maybe we should automate that in some way. And then finally, and this is a request for those that are putting together the data, it'd be really interesting, since we've got 1,000 data points or more, it'd be really interesting to be able to slice and analyze the data by aligning, for example, similar vendor situations. So those who serve very large buying committees and or have large contract values, and perhaps require more than 3 demos to close. How does that cadre compare with all these various parameters, for example? Because right now it's just a large gamish. If you represent 45 products or you represent 1, it's all lumped together the same data. I would love to see ways to break that out. So those are my kickoff thoughts. Who would like to jump in on any of those topics? Crickets in an empty room.
Volunteering versus voluntold. So, Kerry, I'm looking at you. Let's go to you for your your takeaways on the latest SE Comp and workload report.
Yeah, sure. So had a really fun session with Mark Green at DemoFest talking about the entire report, and we probably could have talked for about the whole day because, as Peter said, there is a ton of amazing data in this. This continues to be an industry-defining report, and kudos to the consensus team that drives us. What was really interesting for me at a really high level that was different this year was that you guys at Consensus started to make a lot of inferences around the trends that we were seeing now that you guys have done this for about 4 years. And that puts, I think, a lot of this data into better context to better understand it. How are things changing in our space? Adam, you mentioned it as we were as a bunch of panelists before we started. It would be really interesting if we could talk about what are the implications of how do we make sure that the data is different next year for some of these things that aren't necessarily as favorable as they could be? And I think seeing the trends as they're changing will help us to identify those things. So really like that. I think one of the other high level takeaways around the report in general is, and we always talk about in most of the people in the space that talk about enablement talk about one small tactical thing is you have to make sure you're all speaking the same language as your prospects and your clients. You have to avoid company jargon. You want to use your prospects language. The way that the questions are worded and the terms used in a lot of the questions in the report are open to interpretation in a lot of ways. When we think for something as fundamental as a POC for us, I guarantee that if every panelist here answered what they thought a POC was, it would be a very different answer and probably very different for everyone watching this as well. And so what I would like to see going forward is a little bit more clarity on what was the actual question asked to the audience, and did we provide any clarity about what the intention of the ask was? Because I think we need to be very careful in over-interpreting the data based on our perspective of how we conceive that particular question or word, whereas for someone else, it could be totally different. So for example, on slide 64, which talks about are the different activities that we're engaged in moving the dial, what's really interesting about this report in general is that there's just massive misalignment in general between where we're spending our time and where we think the actual impact is. And that in and of itself is something we can totally unpack and talk about. But to me, this could be really different because when I think about a technical demo versus an intro demo versus a POC, what do those mean and how are those being interpreted? For example, some people think a POC is a trial. Some people, it's just a really highly customized demo. And the answers here could be very different. But the fact is, what we're doing and the impact it's having are not aligned. So Peter talked about we're given a lot of generic demos or not customized demos. Well, why are we doing that? And I think this is a really good opportunity for pre-sales leadership and individual contributors to really look at, am I moving the dial with this activity? And maybe I should be pushing back and saying, is there a better thing that we could be doing here rather than just saying to our account execs, yeah, I'll come and do this demo for you. Is there a more effective way to move forward in our sales cycles? A couple other things that sort of really hit me, for example, was on page 69, which talks about the different functions that we support. It sounds like we're supporting almost everybody in the organization now. Customer success and marketing and channel and product development. And I'm very curious if this is like, for example, business dev at 8% seems odd to me for a pre-sales function. Right. And that could be something as simple as we're being asked to do webinar type demos, which to Peter's point earlier is why aren't you automating that? Because a webinar type demo, probably not a lot of interaction there. It probably is the same demo every time. Should we be spending our time better elsewhere? So a lot of really interesting things to unpack there around, are we supporting the right functions and should we be supporting those functions? The last thing I'll get into that most people that know me know I have a fairly extensive background in comp management and sales performance management. And so the comp aspect of this report is always fascinating to me. On slide 74, we can see that the numbers are improving in terms of the number of individual contributors who have some sort of aspect of a personal quota that is part of their comp. It's about 25%. It was as low as about 15% in the earlier studies and started to slowly grow. One thing to think about, and I know everybody has a very different approach to comp and different thoughts about it, and there's pros and cons of team and individual, but the fact is we should have some of our comp, if not all of it, tied to revenue performance, whether that's individual quotas, team quotas or not, because it is substantially easier for us to get investment from finance if our teams have pay at risk, right? And when we're asking as pre-sales leaders for more enablement dollars and we want to hire people like Peter and myself and Art and whatever to help improve our teams, we're asking for a lot of money. There's got to be a result there. When we're asking for more tooling, we want to buy consensus and we want more headcount on our team. We've got to be able to justify the performance there. It's easier for us to do that when we have more pay at risk because there's less of a risk that the investment we're making in our team is going to just result in the same performance for more spend.
Fantastic, absolutely fantastic points there, Kerry, and resonated a lot. You made a lot, and I'm stepping back into when I was running the pre-sales team, listening to what you're saying, thinking, what would I do differently right now? So, and again, if you're in the chat, if there's things that you're going to do differently listening to these great panelists, put them in the chat, right? If you're brave enough to do that. So, Julia, I'm going to come to you next, if that's okay, from probably a very sunny Germany. So, what was your takeaway from the report this year?
I just underline what what colleagues already said. That's an excellent report, a lot of findings, a lot of great data, and a lot of highlights. Just to pick some of them, and I would repeat maybe some of points that Peter and Kerry mentioned, but in a different way. So Peter, you said that the direction that we are going is negative according to the report. Yes, I agree for some parts, but if we are looking specifically at the findings with the discovery, I found it very interesting that people are now emphasizing more on discovery. So we recognize as SE community, we need to do more discovery, we need to invest more time in it, and people really invest time in it. So we see on the data, we are doing it right or not. That's the other question, not on the report, maybe interesting to dig deeper, but that's a good evolution of the SE role, I would say. Another highlight, looking at the workload, and Kerry, what you already mentioned about misallocation of resources. Yes, absolutely agree. It's getting worse, and this is the direction that we want to change definitely next year. What I would like to highlight, and that's not quite on the report, but I see this overall, and feel free to add your perspective, but I see that we as SEs are always understaffed. Of course, this is due to misallocation of resources. Of course, this is due to our high pairing or not adopting automation tools good enough. But at the same time, SEs is a very, very young community. Looking at the report, the most of the SEs have up to 5 years overall work experience. So it's very hard to find really good SEs on the principal level, on the senior level, who know the industry, know the work, and have the right skills. We need to upskill more people. We need to add more people to pre-sales community. This is my finding. Also interesting fact that still 43% is having this pool assignment. So I haven't been in the pool assignment myself, I can't tell, but what I've heard and what I have for my pairing, so I have regular pairings, I have my 2 AEs paired with me, and I'm 120% locked with this. I would like to better understand how this pool assignment correlates also with the misallocation of resources, running intro demos too much, overload, burnout, based on, okay, do we have the regular allocations, pairings, or do we have this hybrid model or the pool allocations? That's maybe interesting to understand. For me, it was a interesting point. Okay, 43% are doing this. Does it make sense? Yeah, so this to add, overall, last point from my side as well, looking at the KPIs, very interesting finding that 70% top one, 70% of respondents selected revenue is their top KPI. Totally agree. And the followed one, the second one, is feedback from sales, 45% feedback of sales. Why are we tracking that actually? Why is this our number 2 top KPI? I don't get it.
Yeah. Spot on, Julia. And anyone who's listened to me at DemoFest over the years will know I've challenged that for many years. So I'm so glad that you're also challenging that. It's like marking your own homework, and the feedback's always great when you win. It's terrible when you don't. Okay, so let's do that. But no, fantastic insights there. Art, I'm going to come to you next, if that's okay.
Yes. So really good comments. It is interesting, and Julia mentioned this, that Discovery this year finally surpassed intro demos as where time is spent. So that's very interesting. Intro demos were like 4th or 5th, and now, or Discovery was, and now Discovery's actually surpassed that. So that's really good. Speaking about burnout in terms of what the potential connections are, and again, for some of you, you may have a little bit different numbering system for the report depending on when you grabbed it. But if we take a look at slide or page 106, and actually, if you don't mind, I'll just share this because I just put this together for my own sake here. So can you see that, Adam? See
Yes,
the chart?
absolutely.
106. So what's interesting about this is that there is, 26% of burnout now, which is up from 22% in 2023. And I think this can correlate, Julia, you mentioned that there was 5 years of experience. Well, the current survey is saying that 50% have 4 years. So it's actually decreasing. And this is the 3rd year in a row that the amount of experience has decreased. So one caution, and for all the enablement folks that are listening, and certainly managers, when new SEs are onboarded, because there is this feeling of stress that's increasing, make sure that they are onboarded appropriately with the ability to do what they need. They understand their role. They're working well with their counterparts, because the reality is that as their morale is affected by this, let's say that they come in all excited and then they start to have these feelings of burnout, that's going to, of course, decrease performance. And then that also can lead to churn. And it's hard enough right now to find, you know, the qualified people to fulfill the role. But think about all the expertise that's leaving with them if they quit or go and move into a different job. So I thought that was very interesting. Another thing on slide 104, it looks like unqualified demos continue to be a source of a lot of different things. So this is where, and I think right along with unqualified demos is lack of discovery. And we still saw the discovery, of course, needs more improvement. But even right now, unqualified demos are ranked at about 30% or more of demos are unqualified, meaning that the SEs don't have what they need to do their job. In fact, this chart is showing that a 10% increase in unqualified demos has an impact that's equivalent to 55 plus hours of crunch weeks. And that's the crunch week is defined as working more than 55 hours per week. So this is all leading to burnout. Why? Because probably needing to scramble around to figure out, well, what I'm going to do. And maybe that's why, back to Peter's point, we've got so many demos that are not customized because there isn't the opportunity to tailor them to the audience. It just winds up being something that's regurgitated because, hey, I don't know much about this client. I need you to show this demo tomorrow. And that's what's shown. I think this also correlates again to making sure, and this is interesting about the measurements and the fact that quota and ARR are a component of it. And Carrie, you mentioned it's good and it should be even more for internal justification, but also since we do have a portion of that in terms of pre-sales, clearly sales is measured on ARR, quota, total contract value, whatever. Therefore, if we can show the ways that we're helping them to achieve their quota, that's going to be something that they would want. So I think I would just encourage everybody that for management, for individual contributors, it's the help me help you approach of, look, we're all trying to increase our quota. I think personally, you know, as a selfish thing for any pre-sales folks, this is going to help avoid burnout because you'll get better data and information. And then finally, the long work hours and lack of work-life balance really affects the burnout. So, you know, this is something we've all heard forever in terms of work-life balance. What this chart is showing here is the amount of additional burnout that happens as a result of the, you know, extra time that's spent on things that, you know, keep people from enjoying birthday parties and having them to work overtime and all that. So managing that, which I think, again, a root cause is qualification and discovery, working with your salesperson better, that should be able to allow all of us to manage our time better. So pre-sales management, I think, can help once again with proper resources. Julia, you mentioned about pooling and what effect that might have. Certainly, it's an easy model. Certainly, pre-sales is like a free quote unquote resource to the sales team. But at what cost is that flexibility, and at what cost is that adaptability that's required by everybody? And I think this can again be one of the reasons why the length of time in the role is going down. I think that burnout happens quicker, and if not equipped properly at the beginning, this can lead to quicker burnout. So those are a few of the observations I had, and that ties into some of the other things that we saw.
Absolutely.
Only 28 hours in a day.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we all have those weeks where, you know, you feel like you could do with an extra day in the week, and it's when that becomes a pattern. That's when it's a problem. And I you know, speak as a ex pre-sales leader here. It was one of the things that I always used to hate, was seeing someone in that, and you want to do everything you can to help and avoid that. So I'm sure there's a lot of leaders reading this, probably looking at themselves and thinking, is there anything I can do to help my team avoid this burnout? And maybe we'll cover that as we get onto the kind of closing sections. But Amanda, I'm going to come to you from a very sunny Barcelona.
Adam, just one more quick thought on that, Adam, too, though, is that with COVID and with everything going virtual, it just was too easy to schedule back to back meetings. I think a lot of us have figured out ways to manage that now. And I'm seeing a slight trend toward more in-person stuff, but we should not let down our guard on the fact that those things can lead to that burnout, because like you said, it's just too much stuff trying to be done in too short of a period of time. So encouraging to continue to put those buffers on your meetings so that you have a little bit of time to prepare, a little bit of time to debrief, and then work with your manager and your salesperson, because it's not going to do any good if we're not performing well.
I think the early days of the report, when we started to look at burnout a little bit, we did kind of use COVID as a bit of an excuse in the industry that, that work-life balance wasn't there, that it was virtual, there wasn't that barrier for travel to a meeting, so it was easy to back. And that context switching between customers has probably led to a lot of untailored demos as well, because we've got in bad habits if we were looking introspectively at ourselves. But Amanda, enough of my opinions on this. What about your opinions? What have you taken from the report?
Thanks, Adam. It was great listening to Julia, especially talk, because she has an IC role as well. So I identified with a lot of the stuff that she said. I want to touch first on the OT predictors. One thing that caught my attention, I come from infrastructure software, right? So it's a very technical area in which people have the illusion that the more specialized you are, the more recognized you are and the more money you make. And the report actually shows us that generalists versus specialists, it doesn't really make a difference in OT. And in my opinion, both are really important, depending on how your software is, how you do pre-sales. But it's good data to kind of break this illusion that one is better than the other. They're just different, and they're both important. So that's one thing that caught my attention. The other were there's some things I would put like in a whole bucket of workload versus OT versus burnout, because all of those things are correlated. And listening to the colleagues here, I think that we all agree in a lot of themes here. So, for example, working longer hours, the report shows that leads to higher OTE, but working longer hours also leads to more burnout. Like Julia said, like people are younger and younger into the role. So we are doing more than our role is. And one thing that really caught my attention was when we look at the misallocation charts and we see what ICs think can move the needle and what leaders think can move the needle, there is a mismatch there. So I think that there's a mismatch from the onboarding, like Art mentioned, all the way to like how people are recognized, how people perceive how people perceive the company, how they're perceived by the company, and it can lead to a poor talent retention. So when you have a lot of young people that maybe are seeing that the grass is greener in the other side, and they are overworked and they're not balancing work and life, they might want to look at another side. So that was like a big takeaway from me, like how all that information correlates. And the last topic I wanted to touch on is the AESC relationship, which is one of my favorite topics. I'm lucky enough to work with AEs that, I say they're my best friends. And just like Julia, we're assigned to them. And I think that the probably the more experienced teams, even though people are put into pools, they kind of naturally navigate into a more like assigned configuration. So one thing that caught my attention there was that the higher are the AESC ratios, the less influence pre-sales has in comparison to sales. And that's so true, because if you don't have that synergy, and when pre-sales is not recognized according to the influence that we can have, it's harder to get our famous, seat on the table and actually influence other areas in the company. So I think that, pooled configurations with a lot of SEs doing much more than their roles and not finding that balance and all of that, with a poor AESC relationship on top of that, that's probably the recipe for disaster. So, these are some of the areas that we should definitely shift. Yeah. I think that people have mentioned other topics as well. I'm not going to repeat them, but just wanted to highlight one unqualified demos. That topic was brought a couple of times right now, and people should really listen to that, because that leads into discovery, qualification, and all the things that we keep repeating, and we've been repeating for years, right? So there's some of my takes. Yeah.
Some brilliant takeaways. I think what's really good is you bring such a strong IC's point of view to that report, that the leaders on listening to this really should be listening to this to really glean this, because it's something that we should be doing more. Tony, over to you, my friend. So what did you take from this year's report?
Oh, there's again, I can't overstate the quality of other panelists here and what's been stated so far. I mean, there's a wealth of knowledge and great experience that's already been portrayed from what they took away from it. You know, I know every year this is a part of my arsenal in going to bat for the team and looking at compensation in general. And you know, this is early on. Those first couple of years were integral in helping us shift over into a more, we'll say, equitable compensation package related to what pre-sales brings. But you know, for me, I think there's several things that are in line with a lot of what's been said so far. I'll jump on what Amanda just mentioned with the AESE relationship, and you know, even to Peter's early point, like, are we learning anything? Because we seem to be sliding backwards. You know, I'm in the tax accounting industry, so it's Sally that, and when we encourage businesses that we work with, don't do things the same as last year. You have to iterate, you have to evolve in order to continue to grow. And I guess my takeaway in all this is, as this continues to show the same trends, how much of it is what we control from an influence in the pre-sales world? And you know, talk about misallocation of where we're spending time and how we're involved in different aspects of the company beyond the sales world, where our titles are, where our expectations are, the KPIs differ so much. And I think it's a recipe that allows for that overuse that then again results in burnout. So at some point, and again, for those businesses that have pre-sales at the C-suite, they've got the seat at the table, that they're playing that influential role. That's not the majority of I think the industry, and as far as pre-sales is concerned. And at some point, we have to be able to put pressure on the sales organization to adapt. Because if we're doing those same intro demos, which again, rank order, it's near the top of time spent, lower in impact, but we continue to do it year after year, at what point do we start to put that pressure back? And, you know, Peter mentioned, it's not as easy as no dispo, no demo, but it really, how do we start to influence that to the positive? And the more time spent with the sales organization, reinforcing, learning, and pressuring the process, you know, sales in general is going to have churn as well. So I think it's a battle that we'll always fight, but I feel like it's the pre-sales world has to find a way to strengthen that relationship to a point where those trends start to shift to the positive. If we don't, we'll continue to see the same things. Couple other points that stood out. Obviously, the discovery is always important, and how you leverage resources and industry insights, and obviously everybody on the panel, as well as a strong LinkedIn community around pre-sales, how you find ways to increase and leverage discovery is an important aspect of it. But the other piece that stood out to me so much, and I know Amanda and Julie both touched on the pooled model, I think this is the argument of the generalist versus the specialist. You know, if you are a generalist, then everybody knows everything and you can align in a 1-to-3 ratio, that's ideal. In my case specifically, we've got, you know, the neighborhood of 20 solutions that the sales team is going to market with. Not everybody is well versed in all 20 of those. So you end up creating these pockets of knowledge, and the only way to support the entire sales division who's trying to sell those 20 products is to have more of that pool function. And I agree, it ultimately results in burnout. You know, this year in particular, there was a shift in our sales organization in January. We surpassed last year's total number of demos this month already. So we're significantly in that, you know, fear of burnout stage, because the sales team turns to the pre-sales team as the one that they can trust and rely on for that support, which is, I think, fantastic. And again, the shift in even 5 years ago to now of influence and recognition and understanding of how important pre-sales is to an organization beyond the sales division is a fantastic move to the positive, but it has unintended consequences as well, because now it turns to, this team is really strong. And, you know, I won't give my elevator pitch, but all of those areas that we touch, and even in the report where it shows we're spending so much time in other parts of the company, when we turn into the answer for everybody, at what point do you start to delineate and say, well, this is the job function, this is where we support, but we can't do that job function for the other parts of the company. Sales training, you know, the marketing webinars, like there's those layers where I think we've got to get more crisp in defining where we fit in the organization and where we're leveraged. You know, ultimately we affect sales. We want to influence sales, close dollars. I think that's where most of us look at KPIs. But if we're pulled in all those directions at all times, you get the diminishing value in where that time's spent. So it's, I mean, and again, you can unpack this and look at the data in different ways, but there's a lot of questions I have that I don't know we can use the next iteration of this in a question format to answer, but you know, leads us to say, like, as thought leaders in the group, how do we start to change that in market?
Absolutely brilliant insights there, Tony. And the thing I'm kind of sat listening to you guys kind of draw your conclusions, it's fantastically privileged position to be in, that I get to then speak live to you and ask kind of questions from a general point of intrigue. The word burnout's come out in all of you more than any other word this panel so far. It feels very, very on point right now. Probably relevant, especially as we're going into in the Northern Hemisphere, we're going into kind of, you know, the summer season where people will typically try and take a break. So it's probably very pertinent right now. For those of you in the Southern Hemisphere, I apologize. But I'm just kind of drawing conclusions here that you look at the average demos in a week is up, okay, from 4 to 5. We've seen a 25% increase in the average demos per week. We've seen an average tenure in promoted people drop to 2 to 3 years to get promoted. We're seeing an increase in the amount and the amount of people who are sourced for pre-sales from non-SE roles. So they've come from industry with non-SE backgrounds into pre-sales. On top of that, we've got revenue as the leading KPI, okay? And we have 43% of our companies respond, say, I don't automate any of this. And we wonder why burnout's such a topic for us. So the question I'm going to ask you here is that burnout coming from the mentorship demands on at IC level and therefore at leader level to kind of promote, and because you've got to keep the engine running, right? You've got to get people educated and upskilled. Or do you feel it's because of the AE to SE relationship? And I know, Art, you had a really strong view on the AE to SE relationship. I'm just interested to unpack your thoughts here.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, well, I think one thing is that it could be a little bit self-imposed, right? So as pre-sales, as SEs, as individual contributors, you know, we love to solve problems. And even if it seems insurmountable because there's not enough discovery or whatever, somehow or another, we manage to pull it off. Well, that almost breeds more of that type of behavior, right? So there is this aspect of like gently pushing back, or like I said, I say this, help me help you, where it does no good. Because here's the thing, for sales, usually it's a numbers game where they shove the stuff in the top of the funnel. We see a bunch of demos and some stuff pops out the bottom. But if it's truly a funnel, the only way to increase what comes out the bottom is shove more in the top. And that's going to lead to more burnout. So the idea is they should be doing better qualification up front to neck it down to the things that actually do matter. That qualification should lead to discovery information that we can utilize. And yes, this is one place where the SE potentially should move left in the cycle, the buyer cycle, to understand more about what happened. And as a result, all of us will be better for it. So I think it's a bit of, yes, we continue to want to be successful and do our job. At the same time, what can they do, you know, our sales counterparts, to help us, which in turn helps them? Because it's also not about just closing the deal anymore and moving on. It's about consumption and driving consumption and all those types of things. So it really winds up being something where we all have to focus with the end in mind. And it can't be an individual sport with silos anymore. And just shameless plug, that's why I wrote the book that's going to come out, which is about SEs and AMs working together better, because it's still a big problem. I mean, amazingly, after all these years. Peter's got
so
his hand.
here's an interesting conundrum. How many folks in the audience that are ICs want to be the go-to person? So there's a tension here. It's like, I want to be the person that people want for that demo or for that discovery call or whatever it is. I want to be that person. There are books, I think, that have been published that actually say that about, you know, be the go-to person in pre-sales. So now that then is in contention with, I'm overworked, I'm stressed, I'm eating Chinese food in a hotel at 11 p.m. before the trade show demos to stand up the booth, blah, 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 blah. So There's a little bit of balance that needs to be contemplated here on the part of each individual in terms of what are your personal goals and how you're going to get there.
So I think
I want to add one thing to that, and that is when you're thinking about that, you should be constantly asked the question, what could I be doing better, or what could I be doing differently, and how do I stop doing the things that don't contribute? Each person who asks those questions of themselves, asks those questions of their team, of their managers, of their colleagues, they are positioned to improve.
Which is where demo automation comes in. Thank you, Consensus.
There's an element in the report.
And come in, right?
Like if we look at page 55, which is average on target earnings by the number of weeks that you spend working more than 55 hours, right? So how many crunch weeks you work. What's fascinating to me about that report, or about that particular slide, is it was broken down by your job role: individual contributors, senior IC, principal IC, or leaders. And for the bottom two, ICs and senior ICs, there is not a correlation. In fact, the people that work more earn less. And so there's this aspect to Peter's point about, are you working smart, right? And maybe there's just an aspect that, Adam, you brought a really interesting point up when you started to frame this about, there was a time that has slowed down now, but for the last couple of years where there was massive demand for pre-sales contributors or people to move into this role, we were hiring school teachers and musicians and plumbers and other people who were not in this technical space. And it takes longer to promote those people. Well, those people don't have the basis of having technical backgrounds necessarily, or sales backgrounds, or anything else. And they require that much more work on enablement and that kind of stuff. And so I think there's probably a bit of bias in the data here, in that it would be really interesting to see this chart based on like tenure in the space, for example.
Yeah. Really, really well said, Kerry. And what we'll do is slightly move on. I'm interested in your point of view, Kerry. You mentioned you are incredibly passionate about pre-sales comp, and that's a big part of the workload that we haven't really touched on to a great degree in the summaries, because I think burnout and things have taken over. I'm interested in the rise of the kind of issuing of stock and equity and these kind of levers, because that's something we haven't seen. Do you feel that is that a change in comp model for pre-sales, or is that because people are starting to wake up to the strategic nature of pre-sales? Why do you believe that's happening?
I think there's probably a number of factors in there, and I think the least of which is there was this massive competition for the top performers up until about a year and a half ago, when our industry slowed down from a hiring perspective, and teams were looking for any type of lever they could. And if we think about it from a corporate perspective, stock is cheap to issue. It doesn't affect our cash flow. Now, a lot of organizations don't feel that way. They want to maintain the valuations and things like that, and they're very tight with it. And obviously depends on where in a company's journey. Are they private? Are they public? Are they small? Are they large? And what fundings have they done? They're going to have fundamentally different views on distribution of stock. I think the bigger problem here is that I think a lot of people overvalue what stock options are to their overall comp. When we think about, most organizations are not ever going to end up with an exit or an event where you can liquidate that equity. It's a future promise that in a lot of cases just doesn't ever materialize. And I think that especially for younger folks who haven't been around the block as often, they can overvalue those stock options. And so maybe that is a way that organizations attract people to come into the role, that they know that really, if it actually hits, it's going to hit 10 years down the road. It's not going to affect us. So I think that's probably part of it. I think there's a lot of factors that go into that, though.
Kerry, hope is an enormous driver. Charles Revson, when he was asked, what do you produce? That's the head of Revlon. Well, he says, in our factories, we make lipstick. He says, but in our stores, we sell hope.
Great one.
So just before I move on, any questions from the audience, feel free to use the Q&A or use the chat. We're kind of moderating both, so please do drop things in there. Has anyone else got a view on the comp? Has anything that jumped out to anybody on the panel?
Well, it seems to still, yeah, it seems to still be trending upward. I mean, personal quota for USA and Canada increased 3 points this year versus last
Yeah.
year. So, I mean, I don't think that's insignificant. But again, I also think that that goes to the need to compel everybody to not think about just a quote technical win, not think about just a demo that went well, not just think about even a close. It's about consumption. So I like to not think so, and I kind of coined a new phrase maybe is instead of closing the deal, it's really about commitment to consume. And so our job doesn't end at the sale. The salesperson's job doesn't end at the sale, even if we're not directly involved after that. It's about making it happen. So the fact that compensation is geared more toward annual recurring revenue, I think is a good thing because it's going to point everybody in the right direction and get us more on the same page with sales.
Absolutely. So Julie, I'm going to come to you in a second, but just before I do, Bhavshar, I'm going to do a kind of a roundup at the end of a key takeaway. But Julie, the question I've got for you, just as an IC's point of view, is Peter mentioned in his about the no decision tracking and the fact that 2/3 of companies are tracking that. And Amanda, I'm going to get your views on this as well. I was staggered like Peter was about that, but why to you as an IC does it matter that we track no decisions? What do you take away from knowing that, hey, I didn't lose to the competition, because we all know our biggest competitor is no decision? What do you take as an IC? Do you use that feedback and change anything about the way you've performed in future, do you think?
Yes, that's a good question. Well, it's hard for me to answer this question because the company where I currently work in at Atlassian, we have a sales process that is very complex, but at the same time, every opportunity ends somehow in some states. So we have so many customers and just so big footprint that every opportunity lands somewhere. But of course, for us SEs and AEs, there was a initial goal for the opportunity. We wanted to have, for example, this amount of revenue, and we ended up with another amount of revenue. Or we wanted initially to position this and this, and at the end, a customer decided to purchase this and this. So what we do, we usually discuss this as an account team. This is not something that is set up from the management. Maybe it's really a good idea to have this as part of the sales process, like decision review or outcome retro or whatever you call it, but really to understand what was initially set up and what did we end with. Without no decision, more like what did we achieve. We can do more of that, I would say, from the SE perspective, from the sales perspective, or as an account team as well. I think this should be rather on the account team level, and this should be also driven from the account team themselves, not something that is tracked by a KPI maybe, but something that account team wants to do because they want to get better.
Yeah.
Don't know if this makes sense.
The single biggest challenge with no decision outcomes is that they take so long to become a no decision. Quarter after quarter, salespeople predict that, oh, it should close, oh, it should close. And it sometimes in some organization can be 4 quarters before somebody admits, yeah, I guess this isn't going to close. So the lagging indicator of did it become a no decision is insufficient.
Yeah.
Discovery, by looking specifically at, is there a critical date? Is there a value equation that makes sense? Tangible value equation that is acceptable? And is there a critical business issue that is at risk? Those can give you the insights to avoid investing the calories in those kinds of opportunities.
The bit I'm staggered about with not tracking indecision or no decision is that, you know, that's money that's effectively left out on the table that hasn't gone anywhere, that someone potentially had a budget for and went and started a project on that didn't come to the right conclusion. So if you're not tracking it and you can't analyze it to your point, Julia, and work as an account team, you're missing out on revenue besides the learnings. So I think, you know, we track revenue as a leading KPI, but then we don't track no decision that could turn into future revenue. So anyway, that's my take on it. But Tony, Amanda, any views from you on the kind of no decision?
I love talking about no decision. It's my it's one of the things that I'm always picking on when we're doing deal analysis. When I see that we didn't win because of no decision, it definitely means that we missed something in the process. It's what Peter just said. We didn't show the customer the value of what we're trying to sell. We didn't figure out what is the actual date that they need to make a change. We didn't identify their critical business issue. It goes down to this. We didn't do all the steps that we needed to do. It could have started in qualification, and that drives change in behavior. So the more you analyze the no decisions, the more tools you have to show to leadership, to the colleagues. Look, we need to do something about this. There are some changes that we need to do. So I'm, no decision analysis is one of the things that I'm happy to do, because we need to take that, 40% no decision deals and reduce them as much as we can, so we can scale and we can sell more, sell faster, which I think is everybody's objectives here.
Absolutely.
No
Brilliant
decision
point.
outcomes are the single largest consumer of waste time, or generator, I should say, of wasted energy.
Yeah.
Well,
Tony,
if we can quantify
final
that.
question to wrap up, but Tony, your views on that part, please.
I was going to say, if we can quantify and we know that that's the biggest driver there, I think that maybe unpopular decision is, how do we analyze those no decision deals and leverage it into training for the sales organization, right? Because it's a combination of the AE and SE, so it's not trying to point fingers one way or the other. But the end result is, I think that the insight that solutions consultants, sales engineers bring to the table has the ability to influence the training of the sales organization to reduce that number. And I think if SE teams are not currently involved in influencing sales training in some way, that may be another path to go down to help to decrease the number.
Yeah. In fact,
Perfect.
I do a lot of workshops for sales teams as well. And what's amazing is that they can name their named competitors. So if you say, who are your named competitors? They come right off the top of their head. And then you ask, what are you mainly competing against? Of course, eventually they say, do nothing, no decision. Yet they don't necessarily treat that as a competitor. So talk about moving left in the process. What I advocate, and actually the methodology supports it, is put no decision or homegrown solution, which is another variation, or hybrid or best of breed. Put that as another competitor that you take just as seriously as the competitor you're competing against, and put a strategy against that, because this is where we get into the idea of people being possessive about what they already have and not wanting to change, and why risk of change is so important to try to counteract. So I think a lot of people in the chat have been putting, is it SE or AE? It's both, but also, like you said, Tony, sales methodology and sales training needs to use that as a serious competitor upfront.
I think what's interesting is, if you look at loss reason codes in most CRMs, they've not been revisited in years, and they're pretty much driven around the sales process, not the pre-sales process. So maybe I'm in a pre-sales or solutions loss code, or an indecision reason code, maybe some of those ideas. So I'm going to ask the panel a question and let them think about it while I can summarize for the audience. So the question I'm going to ask you, which is a surprise question in our last 2 minutes, is I'm going to ask you, panelists, what you'd love to see change next year. What data point would you love to see different next year? And I'm going to give you kind of a very brief, probably 10 seconds each, to kind of summarize that. But while you think about that, just a shout out to the audience. We love hearing your POV, your point of view on these kind of reports. We put this data out there and this analysis out there to help the profession, to elevate the profession, help us be the superstars that we know we are, and the real strategic function that we know we are, and that we are going to be in the future. And I'm personally very, very passionate about us all in pre-sales learning from what we do and facing these kind of truths, and what we're doing great and do more of it, and what we're not, let's change it. So use this voice, use the report, use the analysis we've done, go read the report, share it on LinkedIn, have a voice. And if you're on this panel and you think, I've not done a LinkedIn post, I'm nervous, go try it. Right? Go and have an opinion and go and have some status, but share your reports, share your opinions. That's how we become better as an industry. So in the final minute, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to whip round. I'm going to round in reverse order this time. So Tony, what would your one thing you want to see change next year be?
You know, for me, there is so much data in this, and I love to unpack it, but then to compare that to prior years and have the trends identified over time would be, I think, a cool way to just wrap up each section as far as compensation or discovery and all those key points. What has been the trend over time, and what can we hope to influence moving forward?
Yeah. Amanda, your number one thing you'd love to see move, what would you like to see in the data?
I'd like to see a little bit of verticalization in the report, like identifying the different types of pre-sales people we have around there. Because I know infrastructure people, you're there, networking people, you're there, SaaS people, you know, there's so many kinds of us. It doesn't mean that we can't navigate between verticals, but it would be nice to have like a picture of how many we are, right? So I would love to see that.
Art, what would you love to see
Well,
change?
Yeah, more about moving the needle toward pre-sales and sales working together better, and how we can continue to progress that, because that is a root cause of a lot of the things that are going on here.
Yeah, brilliant. Kerry?
One big one and one small tactical one. So I referenced the big one earlier. I'd love to see the actual questions that were asked in conjunction with the results, so it's easier to interpret sort of how people may have interpreted the question. The second is very tactically, I'd love to see a question on the percentage of your pay at risk. We can imply it from the OTE numbers and the salary numbers, but that's not on an individual basis. I think the distribution of pay at risk would be really interesting to see.
Yeah. Julia?
Maybe more participants from EMEA region would be interesting to understand what's the difference maybe between the AMAR and the EMEA, how we work, how America work, and definitely less workload, less burnout, hopefully. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. And Peter?
Wow. So this has been a terrific session. I would love to see more change. And most specifically, I'd like to see learning deepened. People try to collect nuggets. That's the popular phrase. I'm looking for a knowledge nugget. And what I'd like to urge people to do is to dig deeper and uncover that vein of knowledge gold, and maybe even that mother lode of wisdom. That requires more investment in yourselves. And the process of doing that, embracing those new ideas, trying them out, is how we will, as everybody loves to say, move the needle.
Brilliant. What a great place to end. I just want to say thank you to all of you for taking your time to not only dissect the report, but share that with the community. Thank you all of you who are watching live and also on recording for taking the time out of your day to come and join us with this. Huge, huge thanks to everyone who participated in the report, and we'll go again next year, bigger and better. But for now, take the report, read it, and share your POV. But thanks all for joining us. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.